would like to invite the moderator of our last panel, Dorothea Ioannou, the Chief Commercial Officer at Shipowners Claims Bureau, as manager of the American P&I. Dorothea, please take the floor, but I would like to thank Alex and Ioanna for honoring us with their presence, and sorry for this small delay, but I think that in shipping and with all these regulations, many delays can happen. Thank you very much, Dorothea, for being with us.
Thank you. I was going to stand in the center.
Και αυτό, αν μπορούμε να το πάμε εδώ εκεί.
Have they activated? Can you hear me? Great. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dorothea Ioannou. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for the American Club. No?
Δεν ακούγεται.
Whoa. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody.
No.
Not yet. I think it's afternoon. Okay, we're on. All right. The first thing I wanted to say is thank you, Danai, because it is a real pleasure to be back home in Greece. Good afternoon, everybody. I am going to be moderating the session on market trends and current issues. I think that this year has been, there's been a lot of topics that have dominated the maritime circle. I think we can start with cyber threats, Brexit, Trump, the China-US trade war, Venezuela, Iran, sanctions generally. But I think we would all agree probably that the most debated, most analyzed subject would probably be IMO 2020. Before I go into some of my introductory remarks, I am going to introduce my two speakers. I'd like to invite them to the stage with me. So I'd like to invite Ioanna Prokopiou, Managing Director of Prominence Maritime and Sea Traders, and Alex Hadjipateras, the Executive Vice President of Business Development for Dorian LPG. I think it's also important to give a little bit of background because of the type of the topic that this is. So Ioanna comes to us with 16 years in shipping. She's got a bachelor's in engineering and a master's in shipping and trade and finance. And she's also director of the board of the North of England P&I Association. See, it's hard for me to say another club's name. Right? She's an elected member also of the board of the Union of Greek Shipowners and also the Cypriot Shipowners Association, and is an alumni of Harvard Business School. Alex comes to us with 13 years in shipping, and it's also very important to note that he is also a director of the UK P&I Club. I said that one okay, I guess. A director of the Helios Pool with MOL since 2018, and a director of the Greek Shipping Cooperation Committee, the GSCC, since 2018, and he has a BA from Georgetown University. All right, let's get into the real topics here. So, as we all know, there are no procedural methods to postpone IMO 2020. It's done. It's happening January 1st. We're going to be changing the way we do business with respect to consumption and fuel supply. So what has been done now by the IMO, though, is although there have been a number of suggestions on how to approach the next stage, they've left the options open. And they're going to be going forward on a dual-based approach, both technical and operational, in order to obtain some long-term goals for reducing generally greenhouse gas emissions. Decarbonization of at least 40% by 2030 and 70% by 2050, and an overall reduction of 50% by 2050 on greenhouse gas emissions. I just want to quote, in order to lead into the two topics that we're going to be talking about today, I want to quote the latest part of the latest address of the Secretary General to the IMO, calling for concrete action. We must now accelerate progress towards the implementation of the initial strategy, looking at new fuels from renewable and sustainable sources, new methods of propulsion, and new ways of maximizing the efficiency of existing propulsion methods, and to talk about the possible options that we have that have been put on the table. Let's open up with Ioanna.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I have a slide presentation, if you can put it up. Okay, thank you. We all know that support for green parties and green agendas has intensified. Issues surrounding the environment and sustainable initiatives continue to become paramount to businesses and individuals alike. As such, the environment will remain a central part of the upcoming regulations. Needless to say that ship owners have invested a lot to protect the environment. Double hulls, ballast water treatment systems, environmental lube oils, now scrubbers, or extensive compliant fuel, and they will continue to do so. For the new decade that is just around the corner, a number of suggested solutions have captured the industry's interest. Aimed at complying with IMO's 2030 and 2050 targets, several technical or operational alternatives, such as LNG, hydrogen, ammonia, speed reduction, power limitation, and others are being under discussion. In the case of greenhouse gas emission reduction, there have been numerous studies done, including one by UCL and funded by the European Commission, which show the effects of several measures proposed to IMO for CO2 reduction. The outcome was that operational measures such as speed reduction or power limitation can reduce emissions by 30 to 40%, while the economic impact is negligible. For the purpose of this discussion, I will be referring to speed reduction, which is very much the same as power limitation. As you can see in this slide, the proposed measures such as EEDI on existing ships, SEMP, and accelerated fleet renewal have marginal emissions reduction. In the best case scenario, a mere 6%. When proposing costly measures for the sake of the environment, it is very important to have a clear view of what the benefit of those measures to our planet will be. In this slide, you can see the environmental benefits with their associated costs of several proposals to IMO. Look at the benefit of speed and its cost. Now look at one of the most popular suggested measures. Why would you say this is the case? Slow steaming has significant environmental benefits. As a rule of thumb, there is a cubic relationship between speed and consumption for ships. This means that a speed reduction of 10% reduces the power demand by 30. But since more ships are needed, the reduction in energy per unit of distance, since ships cover less distance when they slow down, the reduction in energy per unit of distance was found to be 20%, including the emissions of the extra tonnage that would be required. So if you cut speed by 20%, you reduce all emissions by 33, such as SOx, NOx, CO2, and particulate matter, including black carbon, that is a specific threat in the Arctic as it melts the ice much faster. Another benefit of speed reduction is that it can be easily monitored by both ships and regulators, and enforcement can be based on existing port state or flag state instruments, and as mentioned before, it requires no investment. Speed reduction creates a level playing field for all vessels, as eco-vessels can continue to maintain their competitive advantage. Finally, speed reduction has the full support of environmental groups, including WWF and Greenpeace. And I think at this point I will let Dorothea take over, so this will leave us some time for questions and discussion.
Great. Actually, I'm going to hand it over to Alex so that he can also give us his ideas on some of the alternatives.
Thank you. Thank you, Dorothea. Kalispera σας. I also, just waiting for my presentation. Let's see.
Can you see it? Oh, it's there.
I'd like to thank Danai. It's our first chance my first chance to participate as a speaker here, and really want to celebrate the work that she's doing. It's wonderful to see everybody in this room together, staying focused towards the end of the day, and I really appreciate the opportunity as Dorian to present to you a little bit about our perspective. Very quickly, for those of you who don't know, Dorian LPG is listed in the New York Stock Exchange. We were founded as a listed company in 2014. We manage a fleet of 22 LPG carriers. We have all our technical management down the road on Poseidonos Street, and commercial centers in Copenhagen, Singapore, and London. So what I'd like to talk to you today about is a little bit about LPG as fuel. And listening to Ioanna, I fully agree with her points around speed reduction. I think with these ambitious goals in front of us, we have to look at a multi-pronged strategy, clean fuels being a key component of that. Of course, commercially sensitive, so the pricing has to make sense and we have to have support from the customers. LNG has been a leader in this space, and LPG is slowly starting to catch up. So I'd like to give you an overview of where LPG is today, the latest on the LPG new building order front, and talk a little bit about LPG as a conversion. And then during questions, I'm happy to answer anything about other fuels like ammonia and the status of those development phases. The picture here, which we attended, is from Copenhagen, from MAN Diesel's headquarters. It's the first test of an LPG hybrid engine, 4 cylinders. This was from 2018. This was attended by Shell, different shipping companies, classification, and it's worth mentioning that since then, Wärtsilä has also added LPG hybrid engine to their lineup as well. Talking a little bit about the LPG dual fuel engine, one of the big key concerns with LPG was safety. So the LPG engine has a fuel injection process at the top where the liquid is inserted into the engine. It's double wall piping to prevent from any leakages. It's flexible. It can have a mixture of propane, butane, and up to 25% ethane, and has significant reduction in greenhouse gases. We'll see that it reduces SOx by 97%, NOx by 20%, overall 24% for greenhouse gases, and 90% particles matter. A little bit about pricing. This is another key concern, especially as it regards to LPG, which is very dynamically priced. This slide is from Houston, but still I think is a valid data point. Shows the price of LPG versus marine gas oil and high sulfur fuel oil, as well as low sulfur fuel oil. So you can see over the last year, partly due to the high storage capacity and inventories in the US, the price has been very stable, providing it as a solid sort of fuel choice for different ships going forward. LPG is very widely distributed. It's easy to store on small pressurized gas carriers, can also be bunkered through STS. Historically, the major trading routes were Arabian Gulf to South Korea and Japan. That's now expanded to North America, being the largest loading area, going to China before the tariffs, but now going to India, also going to Europe, South America. But it's a flexible, dynamic fuel that can be bunkered very easily. This is a follow-up on the pricing that I said before. Again, when the Arabian Gulf was the major loading area, the pricing was determined by Saudi contract pricing, and many other players based their pricing off of that. Since then, the US has become a global price setter, and there's also been a lot more liquidity around hedging pricing risk and managing your price from the US. You can work with the forward freight market to hedge some of the prices going forward. Of course, with dual fuels, the key element is the price. How much more does it cost? So this is an example of all the new building dual fuel LPG orders today. I would say that the price difference between a traditional VLGC and a new building VLGC with dual fuel is about $5 million. So slightly more than scrubbers. Of course, these ships are going to be delivering about 2 years after the IMO deadline. So many people would be reluctant to look at scrubbers for that time zone. But as a comparison, if you were to look at an LNG-powered Aframax today, the price difference would be in the range of $10 million. Now, out of these projects, about 3 to 4 have time charters attached, whereas the others are speculative, meaning that people believe enough in the technology to take a position themselves and use the fuel for their own account and for their own trade. Also, there are 4 engines being retrofitted. That cost is slightly higher, around $8 million. Again, just following up, the 10 ships that are delivering in 2021, 90% of those will be dual fuel. So as it relates to LPG, we see a clear convergence into LPG as fuel going forward. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Before we go to the audience for further questions, I have a couple of questions I'd like to pose to our speakers. both of you have referred to options that still involve the use of fossil fuels, right? An issue which is intensely debated across the globe and across industries. But is it really feasible or realistic to contemplate a future maintaining the same expectations of the standard of living that we have today in the modern world without the use of fossil fuels? Ioanna, you want to try and take a crack at that?
Yeah, of course. First of all, speed reduction or power limitation or whatever you want to call it is a very temporary solution. It's something that we should be applying until technology is able to catch up with the decarbonized goals that have been set. At this point, there are no alternatives to such to fossil fuels in terms of energy content and in terms of distribution networks. Just bear in mind that LNG bunkering has taken about 40 years for it to be developed, and even though it has been developed, we still don't have any LNG bunkering stations in South America or in, I think there's one in Australia or in Africa. So, I mean, when we're talking about new fuels and new technologies, we have to bear in mind of the infrastructure that will be needed in order for these to be accessible or be viable. Another thing that when considering any new solution, I think what is important to bear in mind is that at this point we're only looking at a very specific period for these fuels and their environmental impact from tank to wake, which means from the time it is on board the ship's tank until it is burnt and is out in the atmosphere. What is important to look at though is a well-to-wake analysis, which means that when it is extracted, a lot of these fuels produce greenhouse gases as well. So even though we might not be forced by regulation at this point, I think the regulator is going to get smart, and very soon we will be talking about solutions that we thought would be viable before, I think won't be viable, or there will be a cut from the regulations point of view. So I think this is something that we need to consider.
Thank you, Ioanna. Did you want to add anything on to that?
I agree with the holistic lifestyle, looking at how the fuels are made, for example. So not just the final output, but what is the source of the hydrogen, if that's one of the hot topics. Also, I think it's important to emphasize the term carbon intensity and CO2 per ton mile. So you want to look at how efficient the ship is overall. And I think that through design, through the shipyards investing in design, maybe through capturing energy through batteries and optimizing use of that energy, you can have a better sort of overall life cycle of the efficiency of the ship. So I think it's important we keep emphasizing that.
Great. We've seen a lot of guidance coming out from the industry in terms of how to prepare for specifically IMO 2020 and January 1st. But let's look beyond that. You spoke a little bit about the new building sector, the impact, the dual fuel capabilities. Do you think that in the current state, the way things are in this flux, that it's possible to have a business strategy? And how are your contractual partners looking at all of this change within your business model?
I think that, thank you for the question, Dorothea. You have to have a business strategy, of course. Maybe part of that strategy is a little bit of wait and see in terms of as the shipyards continue to develop. Our partners and banks and analysts, especially as it relates to the public markets, all of their stakeholders are focused on this. I think there's no presentation that we make that doesn't have at least 1 or 2 slides on environment, shipping, or compliance. So I think it's good when you get the charters and you have the commercial side also there willing to support some of the changes. But as it relates to strategy, you have to have probably plan A, plan B. So there's no panacea as we see it today.
Right. And then going back to also a little bit on the slow steaming, Ioanna, why do you think it is that that's an alternative that doesn't preclude any of the others, right? So why do you think it's not something, let's say, that was, and it's supported by many of the organizations you mentioned, why do you think that's something that just wasn't immediately adopted? Tough one.
That's a tough question. It's
Provocative one.
It is a good one as well.
Yeah.
First of all, I have to say that our industry is very fragmented. We have thousands of shipping companies all over the world, whereas the engine manufacturers are far fewer. the oil producing, the big oil majors are very few as well. So somehow we seem to be the ones that are being picked on in terms of what the technology we're going to come up with. So in that sense, I think that the reason why it hasn't gained, let's say, more traction is because no one has lobbied for it, and also it's a solution that no one's going to make money out of it as well. As you saw in the previous slide, it has zero investment from anybody's side, and somehow it's a solution that hasn't...
It has pure benefits towards the goals.
I don't know how to put it nicer. So,
yes,
yeah.
Got it. I think as far as our questions that we had thought about today, yes, we would like to invite questions from the audience on any of these topics or related topics that have come up. I guess you guys covered it all.
Not at all.
Is there anything else? Oh, great. Yes, please. Microphone over here.
We have a brave candidate.
I hate to be the advocate to Ioanna, I know her well, but I just need to make a few things straight about LNG since you are advocates of opposite directions. One thing that LNG as a fuel is only been trying over since 2015, not 40 years. So on this short 5 years, we have done strides, and we think that's going to be the next fuel, and it is all over available, except Latin America, that is coming over the next few years. So just to put the record straight on LNG alone, one thing on the slow steaming, and I agree with you that in any technology, if it's LNG, fuel, batteries, we need to take all the process where you're coming, and you have to keep in mind that even producing very environmental friendly solutions like batteries, you need to produce them, and these produce CO2s and emissions. So on the whole process, we need to know what's the emission. So going forward as an industry, I agree that we need to find a solution that is suitable for everybody, and we need to keep in mind that from now on, we're going to see a different fuel mix coming abroad. So that was as a comment.
Can I comment back?
Of course. Danae will love that. She lives for this stuff.
First of all, as a word of caution, LNG, we have a lot of LNG carriers as well, and we burn it as a fuel. So I shouldn't be saying that, but it's going to be high time at some point, very, very soon, that they're going to say that the way that we produce LNG out of the earth is producing methane, which is 86 times more poisonous to the environment than CO2. So it's a word of caution. It's coming our way, so you should be looking at it more holistically. Now, in terms of batteries, that you mentioned batteries, I didn't understand if you're pro or against batteries.
It's going to be part of the mix. I'm not against, but we cannot say that because we all think that they're very clean, because at the last part, when you're consuming, you don't emit anything. But in order to produce the battery, there's a lot of emissions coming on the production. So as a whole, we just need to put things in perspective. That's why I make the comment. Okay,
just for batteries as well, capacity is an issue. Because when you have, for example, a 2,000 TEU vessel, if you wanted to have, let's say, a range of 2,000 nautical miles, no, if you want to have a range of 400 nautical miles, the size of the batteries is going to be only 10% of the dead weight. But if you want it to be ocean going, like most of our vessels are, and you need 2,000 nautical miles range, basically the batteries would take 70% of the dead weight. So you'd basically be carrying the batteries around. So until they become more efficient, there's no batteries are... Sorry to pick on you.
Thank you. Very good. Good discussion. That's what we want here. Alex, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Or Ioanna, do you have any other questions? Did you want to add something?
Just a question for Ioanna, because...
Oh, interesting.
Because whenever slow steaming is raised, the automatic comeback that people mention is governance and how to kind of control it and then focus around quote-unquote cheating, and depending on the market. So I was curious, you had mentioned that it was submitted to some regulatory bodies, but how you would envision...
It's very easy. Yeah. We all have the automatic identification system. The other suggestion that's more dubious is the power limitation. How are you going to manage the override authority that the captain's going to have for the power limitation? with the AIS, you know exactly where the ship is and at what speed it has, and it emits it every few seconds. So you can't cheat with speed. You can cheat with power, though.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Interesting. Any further questions from the audience? No, with that, I think we can wrap up this. I'd like to thank both Ioanna and Alex. That was a very, very interesting discussion. And thank you for the privilege of moderating.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would like, of course, to thank you all for being with us, because it's very important. I think that all the speeches today, of course, it's going to be, we will have the closing remarks from Kostas Rokos, but it's very important that, of course, we must have also what the ship owners are thinking. And it's very, very important that we're listening to the providers of the market and what they say. And thank you very, very much, because it's not easy to be in the position to close a conference, a shipping forum, that many question marks are still on the air. But I will start on what Ioanna said me before yesterday. Now 2020 is back.
Yeah.
We have to go for 2030 and 2050.
Yeah.
So let's hope that we will be all together and very powerful for 2030 and 2050. Thank you for the honor
Thank
to
you.
have you.
Thank you. You coming for the photo? Yes. Family photo.
Gender equality.
Okay.